Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. In 2007, I was young. But even after all these years, I cannot figure out what the heck I saw. I have only told very few people, because I fear them labeling me a nut. I was in upstate New York, and we were driving at night in a super rural town. There was a little town we drove around in often, so we knew our way around and knew shortcuts. On this night, we wanted to go to a party, and we chose to take a shortcut. We were not inebriated at all. Ultimately, that was the goal of the night. This kind of messed those plans up. There was a small side street where you could turn left into a one-lane tunnel and cut to the main road. At the end of the street was a lattice field that ran parallel to a visible train track. Behind it, there was a pole with a circular mirror pointing at the tracks, I assumed for maintenance workers. This mirror was 10 feet off the ground. As we pulled up to turn into the tunnel, we stopped for a moment as we were talking. We looked forward toward the field. I don't know what happened, but there was this tense silence and fear that came over us. We saw this slouched creature, almost squatting, just staring. At first, we could have thought it was maybe a deer or a bear, but then it turned its head, looked at the car, and its eyes widened in surprise. They reflected green like cat eyes, but huge. It stood up, and that's when we realized it had two legs. We could see its shape. Someone whispered to turn on the high beams. When we did, I was so afraid I couldn't even scream. It was very tall, easily 8 or 9 feet, but its spine was still visible, as it was skinny and walked hunched over. You could even see its hip bones in its shadow. The thing is, it seemed just as terrified as we were. It took off running straight into the woods. We went flying through the tunnel so we could get parallel and maybe catch another glimpse, but it was gone, like we had scared it off. The whole drive home, we were shaken. I tried to make jokes about it being an anorexic Sasquatch or just Helen drunk, or Shaquille O'Neal in a costume, but it didn't change the feeling. It was like that moment of fear zapped energy from us. No, I did not check the time. I regret not checking the clock before and after. Has anybody ever heard of something like this? This account is not my own, but was told to me by a Marine doing combat tours in Afghanistan. For the sake of his job and security clearance, he has asked that I not give any names or mention what region they were operating in. From my understanding, the individuals who were with him during the encounter were from a task force operating under orders for the CIA. Beyond that, I was told next to nothing. I refer to him as Sarge, if only to have a name. During a patrol checking on some local farmers, Sarge's unit was made aware of a deadly being living in a cave system near their farms. When pushed for more information, the locals were only willing to say that this being was stealing from their farms and had killed a few people who had made the mistake of trying to protect their livelihood from it. Convinced the locals were being harassed by a group of Taliban fighters, half of Sarge's unit was sent out to investigate and either arrest or kill any hostile forces in the area. With a few Humvees armed with M2 machine guns, they went out to the cave where the mysterious being supposedly lived. Upon arrival, they noticed nothing of interest. There were signs that something was living in the cave, and the soldiers found animal bones scattered around the entry. Not wanting to risk his entire unit fighting in a cave that the enemy would know very well, Sarge sent his 2 fastest Marines to investigate. The 2 men just gave the others a cocky grin and a thumbs up before disappearing into the darkness beyond the mouth of the cave. For 10 minutes, there was nothing, not a single sound inside or outside the cave, other than the idle chatter of the bored Marines. Then, sound erupted from the cave, shouting and screaming. In a matter of seconds, the 2 men emerged from the cave at a full run and zipped past their teammates, one of them shouting, "Run. Just run." But like the hard-ass special forces operators they were, the other soldiers stood their ground, only to see a massive man emerge from the cave. He stood nearly 10 feet tall, with leathery skin and red hair. In one of his massive hands was a log that he began waving at the soldiers in a very obviously threatening manner. Shocked but not panicked, Sarge commanded his men to shoot, and the 12 Marines opened fire. But the bullets seemed to do little more than piss this giant off. Finally, in desperation, one of them fired a grenade launcher at the being, blowing out a massive chunk of its flesh, exposing a small portion of its ribs, and ripping most of the skin and muscle off. The giant retreated into the cave, and the soldiers decided the best thing to do was to head back to the village and report to the rest of their unit. Clearly, this was more than a few Taliban militants. Even with the gaping wound, the giant was too terrifying for the Marines to willingly walk into his territory, so they headed back and reported to their CO. Of course, their boss didn't believe them and demanded to see proof. So that night, they drove him out to the cave and showed him some of the shredded flesh that had been blown off by the grenade launcher. From there, the report went up the chain, and nobody knows what was done about this creature. I wish he would have told me more, and maybe you guys can help me find an answer. From what I've managed to find on my own, accounts like this are not uncommon in that part of the Middle East. Of course, since all of these reports are word-of-mouth stories, I don't know how factual they are or if they've been exaggerated. If anyone out there knows what this thing could have been, let me know. My grandpa was born in the last years of the 19th century and spent his entire life as a farmer and rancher in rural Idaho. He had tons of old cowboy stories he would tell us grandkids. Most of them were funny, some were cautionary, but a few were downright creepy. When my grandpa was 6 years old, he, along with his older brother and a gang of kids from nearby farms, decided to go ice skating for the day. At the time, my great-grandpa was working as a ranch hand, and the family lived near Chesterfield, Idaho, now mostly a ghost town. It was a bright and sunny January day in 1902. Though the temperature was low, the sun kept things somewhat warm. The kids hitched their sleighs to their horses and headed down to the Portneuf River to ice skate. There were 8 of them altogether, excited to show off their new skates from Christmas. Along with my grandpa and his brother, there were the 3 Robertson kids, Tommy Bayer, and the Gooch twins. The best spot to skate was near the Gooch family's ranch. The river there was broad and shallow, so the ice tended to be thicker. And even if they did fall through, they'd just get their legs wet. They spent a couple of hours skating when suddenly, a loud scream came from a willow bush on the opposite bank. The kids froze, watching as a giant man, covered head to toe in thick black fur, came lumbering out of the bushes. He was carrying a large tree branch and screaming in rage. The kids panicked and fled toward the sleighs, scrambling up the riverbank in their skates. My grandpa, being the youngest, was at the back of the group. He couldn't get a good foothold because of his skates and fell backward onto the ice. The giant was now crossing the river toward them, still screaming and swinging his branch. My grandpa was certain the creature was going to eat him. As my grandpa told it, Lady Luck smiled down on me that day by the river. Just as the giant reached the middle of the river, the ice gave way beneath him. He sank up to his shins, struggling to pull himself back onto solid ice. That delay gave my grandpa's brother just enough time to jump down and cut the laces of his skates. They left the skates behind and dashed up the riverbank, jumping onto the sleighs. As they looked back, they saw the giant cresting the riverbank, but to their relief, he didn't chase them. He just stood there, howling and swinging his tree branch. Back at the Gooch Ranch, the kids told their story to John Gooch, the twins' grandfather. Word spread quickly through the tiny farming community, and soon a posse was formed to hunt down the beast. At the skating spot, they found massive footprints, nearly 2 feet in length. My grandpa's abandoned skates were nearby, both bent in half like horseshoes. The tracks led west into the nearby mountains. The posse followed them as far as they could, but deep snow eventually forced them to turn back. The creature was never seen in that area again. The story captivated the small community, and soon word of the Idaho wild man spread across the countryside. That spring, my great-grandpa decided to buy a ranch farther north in the Little Lost River Valley. My grandpa had many other weird and creepy backwoods stories, but he always said this encounter frightened him the most. He never knew for sure if the giant intended to kill him, but he was certain that if it hadn't broken through the ice, his brother never would have had the chance to cut his laces, and he wouldn't have made it out alive. About 8 hours ago, I stumbled upon this sub and went through as many posts and comments as I could. That inspired me to share a story of something I experienced about 4 to 5 years ago. I've told this story in a Facebook group about supernatural beings in Alaska, but I was mostly laughed at and criticized. So if you're one of those types of people, please just skip this story. From the posts I've seen, you guys should be familiar with little people, right? I live in Alaska, so we have both little people and big people. We have our own native words for them, and there are countless stories about encounters with both. Big people are basically the same as little people, just much taller. A long time ago, before photographs were common in Alaska, my ancestors lived in harmony with the little people. They were neighbors and coexisted for a long time, until one day, one of the natives' dogs ate a little person's baby. The child had stumbled too close to the dog, and food was scarce, making it difficult to keep all the dog packs well fed. The little people's leader met with the native leader and suggested they put down the dog, and all would be forgiven. But the dog was the natives' finest, the leader of their pack for many years, and he refused. I'll never understand why he couldn't sacrifice one dog to keep peace between the people, but that was his decision. After that, both sides split up, and it's been that way ever since. Sometimes, I wonder how life would be if the native leader had agreed. One winter night in Alaska, around 5 a.m., I went outside to smoke a cigarette. It was deathly quiet and dark, as it usually is at that time. I live in a really, really small town that barely stretches a mile long. Outside my house, there's only one LED light on an electric pole about a block or two away. At that time of night, no one is ever out riding their machines or four-wheelers. And almost no one walks, let alone runs. I was about halfway through my cigarette when I saw something out of the corner of my eye. At first, I thought it was someone jogging. But who the hell would be jogging at 5 a.m. on a freezing winter night? No one in my town runs outside. Some teachers do, but they were all out of town for the holidays. It was Christmas season, and snow was lightly falling. I turned to look, and, oh, hell. This thing, a 7-foot humanoid, was blasting down the street. I'm talking Usain Bolt level sprinting, like it was going for Olympic gold. I'm not great at height perception, but I know it was at least 6'8", maybe even 7 feet tall. But here's where it gets creepy. When humans run, they move their arms, it's instinct. It helps with momentum, balance, speed. But this thing? Its arms were tucked against its hips, completely still. Only its legs moved, pumping at an insane speed. It had to be going at least 20 to 25 miles per hour, maybe 32 to 40 kilometers per hour. I was already surprised, but then I noticed something else. It was watching me. Its upper body was turned toward me the whole time it was running. I could see the rough outline of its head, facing me, even as it burned down the road. There was a bright LED light a couple of blocks away, and it should have helped me see its face. But the way the light was positioned, on the other side of its body as it looked at me, it didn't illuminate a damn thing. I couldn't make out a face. Just a massive, fast-moving shadow staring me down. The whole encounter lasted maybe 10 to 15 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Right behind it, a fox was chasing after it, like it was its pet. Or its companion. Or something else entirely. In Alaska, it's widely believed that both big and little people have supernatural abilities. One of those abilities is shapeshifting, transforming into any animal of their choosing. So I have no idea if that fox was with it or was it. And I'll probably never know. As soon as they disappeared from sight, I stepped forward onto the porch, trying to see where they went. When I later told my friend that part, he asked, "What if it had just turned around and run straight at you?" That thought hit me hard. I realized how dumb I was for trying to follow it, like some idiot in a horror movie. If I'd seen it again, I don't know what I would have done. Maybe it was better that I didn't. I didn't even finish my cigarette. I just chucked it across the yard and noped back inside. I barely processed what had happened. I went to bed and didn't speak about it for a year. When I finally told my friend, the one who made me realize how stupid I'd been, he immediately said the native word we have for tall people. A lot of my people doubt me when I tell them this story, and it infuriates me. Our culture has been tied to these beings for hundreds of years. We have folklore about them, but also real encounters, stories passed down, stories that still happen today. If you ever read up on supernatural beings in native Alaska, you'll find some that are downright terrifying. This happened years ago, but I still think about it. Why me? Why did it single me out? Of all people? I used to hear stories from my friends about little people and was always disappointed that I'd never seen one. I used to say, man, I wish I could run into a little person or something. Maybe they heard me. Maybe one of their supernatural abilities let them sense my curiosity. Maybe this thing was mocking me, like, this is what you wanted to see, huh? For a long time, I wouldn't go anywhere at night unless I had a ride. I didn't know what would happen if I saw it again. That fear lasted about a year, then I guess I just forgot about it. Now, I can walk alone at night without worrying so much. I've done it countless times since then. If it wanted to do something to me, it damn sure could have by now. People say these beings choose who can see them and who can't. Their stealth is unmatched. Only a select few ever catch a glimpse of them. That's why I still wonder. Why me? Did it do this just to prove it was real? To tell me, yeah, we exist? I'll never know. And I'm sure as hell not going to ask. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.